Hello, everybody. I think we are live and we are going to talk today about Salesforce Flow Tips. And I have a guest here next to me, Daryl Moon, all the way from Australia. Daryl and I have known each other quite some time now, and we wanted to do something like this, but we didn't really get a chance to do it up till now. Right, Daryl?
That's right. Being so far away, Andy, it's a bit challenging and with our different time zones, but we finally got it together.
Yeah. So, for those of you who haven't maybe listened to me before, I spend a lot of time building flows on the Salesforce platform, and I'm quite passionate about teaching others how to build flow automation as well. And doing that, I noticed that Daryl is doing that all the way from Australia and doing that very, very well. And I was uh, on my summer vacation in Turkey when we first connected, and I
That's
think I
right.
was at a hospital getting some blood work done or something. My relationship with my home country, Turkey, is interesting. Half of my time over there I spent at the hospital doing my annual physicals, and the rest of the time I actually eat and have fun. Usually, the eating and have fun part comes before the hospital, which is not a good sequence. You don't want to do it that way. But so I think last time we talked, I was at the hospital talking to you outside and trying to use the Wi-Fi that was quite weak and trying to connect to you all the way in Australia. But my take on these things is I think it is fantastic that we have so many good resources, good experts, content creators focusing on flow. I mean, the more the merrier. That's how I always thought, and I try to connect and promote with many people. And since then, we've been trying to do something. And I connected with you, trying to find the time that works for both of us. And you said, like, okay, this Monday, thinking I think initially that was going to be a one-to-one. But it was this live session, right?
Yeah, you caught me off guard there a bit, Andy, but that's okay.
That's okay. So we got this one really
We
quick
got
together.
to go with the flow, don't we?
Yeah, and it was actually tremendous. We had so many people. We had at some point 200 people registered on LinkedIn. But in any case, even if people cannot make it at this time, there are a number of people that get to catch it from the recording. So the recording will be available here on both LinkedIn and YouTube, and they'll be able to watch it. So today, before we get started, though, Daryl, I've known you quite some time, but I actually don't know your story very well. Can you actually tell everybody what you do? Do you have a day job? Is this your day job? So I know you like to keep yourself busy, but
No, I do have a day job. So I'm a full-time Salesforce Improvement Consultant, they call me. So I was brought into a local company here in Australia to improve their predominantly on the Sales Cloud side of things. So we have 115 users, and that's my full-time role. And my part-time role is running Certified CRM, trying to help other members of the Ohana come to grips with things like flow and basic administration tasks, and to achieve their certifications and ultimately help them get a job in this great ecosystem.
and your material is received very well. I know that, and you interact with many people on LinkedIn, on several platforms. You actually keep up very well. So today we are going to talk about Salesforce flow tips, and we're going to get started with the basics, and then we're going to go into some more technical details on what to do, what not to do, what's our recommendation. So before we get started, as most of our viewers also know, Salesforce announced last year in Dreamforce 2021 that they are decommissioning, retiring workflow rules and process builder. And those were the two automation tools that they've had for a very long time, more the legacy products. And the Flow product has been around for quite some time as well, but they said we are going to accelerate the development of the Flow tool. And we have seen that happen in the last few releases, and then we have now Spring 22 coming, and they are building the product quite nicely. They are building on top of the existing functionality. So why Why do we recommend that folks actually learn flow at this point? Why do you think it's important?
Um, just going back to what you said there about the product improving, I can remember looking at Flow. I think they called it Cloud Flow or Flow Design or something like that about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was horrible. It was a horrible product. The user interface was really poor, and it was extremely hard to do anything. Then they did a big makeover, and it became, I don't know, Cloud Flow Designer or something. Anyway, they changed the name slightly, and it became a lot more usable. And suddenly we had in our hands a tool that allowed us to expand on what we got out of the box for Salesforce. So a lot of the features that we can build with Flow are enhancements. So we're expanding upon the basic functionality that we get with Salesforce and being able to do things that we couldn't do before. It might be just a bit of a tweak in the way the user interface works, or we might present a screen that the user inputs half a dozen fields, but then in the background, we go off and do some really complex work that would have taken a whole lot of keystrokes and a whole lot of effort for them. So it's enabled us to do a whole lot of automation, particularly around the screen flows, and save our users an awful lot of work.
Yes, I totally agree. And sometimes we go into debates and we chat about whether the solution is strong or is it's a good solution in this case, in this use case versus another use case. And we have also amongst the audience developers, admins, and I call them low coders. People like ourselves debating about the issue. And I think one thing that everybody agrees, if you need to put something on screen, I think ScreenFlow is a very, very fast and efficient solution because it takes actually quite an effort if you're a developer to program the logic and also put something on the screen and make it work. So, ScreenFlow is an accelerator that way. And by the way, many people don't realize the folks that I interact today who are trying to learn flow just because workflow rules and process builders are getting retired, they don't realize that uh, in flow world, the process builder and workflow rule part of the equation is just record triggered flows. And that's just, maybe 1/10 of the solution or maybe 1/6 of the solution, right? So there is much more to it, especially the screen flow part is very interesting.
Just to comment on that, and there are some tools around that will migrate those process builder or workflows for you. So Salesforce have in the spring 22 release that's just coming out now, they've got a tool there to migrate. I think it's workflow rules initially, but it really is an opportunity to re-engineer those automations rather than just simply use a tool to lift and shift one pile of garbage from one technology to another. And you got to remember that some of these workflow rules could have been around for 5 or 6 years or longer, and the business might not be using them still. So it's
Mhm.
not a matter of just simply converting them. It should be a matter of having a really good look at what's in those automations and see if they can be rebuilt and combined into, maybe you can combine several existing workflows or process builder into one much more efficient flow. And yeah, as you said, Andy, if that's all you're seeing that flow is, then you're right. That's only 10% of it. There's this whole other world there around screen-based flows, and what you can build there is just enormous. That's probably where I spend most of my time building screen-based flows, making it
Yeah.
easy for my end users.
And that seems to be actually a skill that's in demand and especially valuable nowadays, the screen
Mm,
side of things, because you can use that within your org. You can deploy it on a community, which they call digital experience nowadays, or on your mobile app even. You can use it
yes.
in many different use cases. And
Mm,
another good friend, Terry Miller, and I had a chat like this one on LinkedIn the other day, and this was the topic. We said, don't migrate your automation to flows, meaning do not take it one to one and migrate it using like a migration tool. First, in most of the orgs and organizations, we don't even know what's in there. Like you said,
Yep.
we have been building automation for years. Some of it is in there and it's not even being triggered at all because they are obsolete, and some of it is in there. They need to be structured, and they don't work in the most efficient way. And because the functionality on the flow side is so much more powerful, you first need to learn what's available for you, the tools that are available for you on the flow side, and then uh, possibly redesign, merge, and optimize, and then again roll it out to the flow side. If you have a simple field update, or if you have a simple email alert or task creation or something, and you want to keep it, you don't have an opportunity to merge it, you can just use a tool to migrate it. I'm fine with that. But that's quite rare. So when we're talking about migrating, we're not really talking about a mass migration of automatic uh, tool usage or something like that. That's what I think about that. And another piece we wanted to talk about, well, when we were chatting before this session, we wanted to also focus about, and I spent quite some time thinking about it lately. It is quite important that folks, before they learn flow, they understand the basics of admin stuff, right? So especially the standard objects, the different field types, the relationship types. I get a lot of questions lately from folks who have just started learning flow, and it seems like they do not understand some of those basics, and they are trying to loop within loop and trying to get like second level deep related records. So that's not going to work very well, obviously, right?
No, and that's a good point, Andy. If you're going to build out an automation around the opportunity, you need to know what's related to that object. So it's got an account that it's related to. There are some contact records that are related in there as well. There's some activities like activities and events and emails and things like that. If you don't understand how all those hook together, and that functionality is all built in. You don't have to go and build that. Those relationships are there. You may just simply need to create some records. And we actually had a query from a Matt Wilkich earlier, and he asked about what ID and who ID. What were these concepts? So um, questions like that, they're critical to understanding a what ID and a who ID. If we start with the what, that refers to the ID of a non-person object. So what is it that we're referring to? So the what ID could refer to the opportunity. It could refer to the account. It could refer to a case. Okay, so it's a thing, not a person. So if we're looking at creating activities, we want to relate those activities back to an account, perhaps. So we would pass a what ID and we would pass the account ID in there to be able to relate that new activity to an account. If we want to relate it to a person, then we use a who ID. And the who ID refers to either a contact or a lead. So now we're talking about people records. And again, if we want to relate that activity back to one of those objects, one of those records in those objects, we pass that through in a who ID. So without understanding how those relationships work, and that one is the what ID and who ID are a particularly tricky one. They call them polynomial, I think, Andy, is that right?
I don't
Relationship.
remember. I
Yeah,
don't
it's a
remember.
tricky one because it can refer to anything. Like the what can be any type of object that's not a person. So there is not, for example, on activities, there's a what ID. It doesn't. It's not an opportunity ID. It's not an account ID. It's whatever you put in there. Um, that's what will be related to. And likewise with the who ID, whoever's ID you put in there, whether it be belonging to a lead or a contact record, that's where the relationship will be built, and that's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean that actually is completely based on the data model that's been there forever, I guess. So,
Yes, yes,
if you
it's a
don't know that,
fundamental.
yeah, the question was about how to deal with events and activities and that kind of stuff within Flow. But in fact, it's not that hard to deal with them in Flow. It's just hard to deal with them in general. Their data model is quite particular. So you got to know those details about the data
Mm.
model. I mean, the first thing I usually do when I need to design a solution, I go to my schema builder. So, I actually deselect all the objects and I select the objects that I need and I look at their relationships. I look at their fields. I look at their field types. I mainly use it for browser purposes, to view stuff. It's not that top of the line or most recent functionality to view you get in there, but it's quite important that you understand all those relationships. So this is actually a good reminder. Now we are about 15, 16 minutes into our live cast, to remind our viewers to ask their questions in the chat window, because we are able to see the questions and we are going to try and answer all those questions. So the questions that you answer in the chat window, we are going to try and bring up on the screen and talk to it.
Tim, just while we're on that, Tim Combridge, a good colleague of mine from back here in Australia, has just reminded me that relationship is called polymorphic.
Oh, okay.
Polymorphic. So that means poly means many. So it kind of morphs into many different objects.
Yes. Very good
Thanks,
point.
Tim.
Thank you very much, Tim. Okay, yeah. So, and in reviewing what else we had, I mean, when we are talking about the fundamentals and we are talking about the flows, and we said we need to know the different field types, the relationships, the objects. The most important objects we have is the big five, right? Leads, opportunities, accounts, contacts, and the case. So you got to know those. You got to know how to deal with those. And once you know all that stuff and you go into your flows, maybe when you're dealing with your record triggered flows, you don't feel it that much because you have automatically created record variables, the dollar record notation. You can refer to the record and the field values that trigger the flow. But it's important to know your variables and then the concept of record variable and collections, right? Especially as you go to multiple records. What can you say about that?
Okay, so a variable is essentially a placeholder where you can put something for later on. So the glass that you've got, you were just taking a sip from there, is we can think of it as a variable, and we can place in that some wine, or we can place in that some tea or some water for use later on. So it's just a place where we can put something. Maybe we read a record from the Salesforce database and we want to put all of those fields that we've read, we want to put them somewhere, because later on we're going to want to have a look at one of those fields and examine its contents and perform some action. So we need somewhere to put it. So we go and grab it from the database, and it's just a space in memory where we can say, that's where that account record is. And later on, when I need it, I can go back there and I can pull the values out of that. So that's the concept of a variable, just a temporary placeholder. A collection, now that variable can be a single field. So it might just be a number, and it might be the number of records that were returned, or it might be a counter of how many times we've been around the loop, or it might be a text field that has the ID of a record, or it actually could be a complete record. So that variable can vary. Now, a collection is a bit of a different thing. A collection is a whole bunch of those together. Think about a scenario where you go into a supermarket to buy some bread. So you go into the supermarket, you take a loaf of bread off the shelf, you take it to the checkout, and you complete a transaction. And during that transaction, you're exchanging money and the goods become yours and you walk out the shop. Fine. So you've gone in with this empty basket, you put one item in it, you paid for it, it becomes yours, you take it, put it in your car, take it home. So that's a very simple, just one item in your variable. What if you've got a shopping list of a whole bunch of things that you need to get? So you've got a criteria by which you're going to select a whole lot of different items. So you're going to select some bread and some cheese and some eggs and some pasta and some pasta sauce and whatever else you need to cook your dinner. You don't take them one at a time to the checkout, pay for them, and then walk out the door, put them in your car, come back in, get the eggs, do that 10 times. You take that collection, put them in your basket, take them to the checkout, and you check out all in one transaction. And it's one credit card transaction, it's one receipt at the end, one box of goods, you put in the back of your car and you take home. So that's the difference between just a single variable and a collection. So think of that collection think of it as a box full of things. There's a whole bunch of different things in there, and that box could be a different shape or a different type or a different size, depending upon what type of things that you put in there.
Yeah, we actually, as educators, we all have our own metaphors dealing with that concept, right? Because we usually teach non-technical people, usually people that come from a non-technical background, admins, to build flow automation. And once you start building like medium level or high level in complexity flows, you start dealing with programming concepts, and that's one of them, variables and collections. If you do not understand that, you're not going to be able to do many of the things that are required for you to complete sophisticated transactions. Then you need to loop through those, and then you need to understand the whole loop concept, which is in itself again a complicated concept for non-technical folks learning flow. But you have actually quite an extensive material on your website, right? You're certified CRM. You have a training program, and I have a training program on Udemy dealing with those concepts. And then not only that, you actually volunteer and present at many user group meetings, right? Especially in Australia, India, all the Asian time zones. I see that you do a lot of activity. You must also receive a lot of questions about how to do things in flow.
I do. A lot of the beginners are things that we've covered already. And you're right in that if you don't have that basic understanding of how those five, as you mentioned, those five key objects work and how all those relationships fit together, it's a bit like trying to build the roof on your house if you don't understand how the foundations and how all the framing and structure works. So it is important to understand those basics first. But a lot of the questions I get are very specific. My flow broke kind of thing. And that's really hard, because then you have a great conversation about, well, okay, send me some screenshots, give me some more detail about where we're at. So, and they can be very, very specific. So it is often hard for me to respond to many of those type of questions. If they're more generic guidance and things like that, then yeah, that's a bit easier.
Yeah. And I think it's also important here that I have certain guidelines for myself when I help out other people around flow. And I try to go by those, and I think it's beneficial for everybody, which is I lately started getting a number of questions in direct messages, right? Somebody will find you on some of the social platforms and direct message you saying, okay, I have this particular problem. I'm trying to build this use case. Help me how to do it. I actually want to help many people at the same time. So, when I respond to those messages, I'd like to respond to those messages on one of the public platforms. So ask me on, I have actually now a Slack workspace where I help people. We have now more than 300 people asking questions. Ask me on there, ask me on Twitter, ask me on Ohana Slack, go to the Trailblazer groups, the forums, and then ask on questions, right? So that when we answer you, that answer will be searchable. So it will help actually multiple people.
Yeah, look,
So,
I've got to agree with you on that. That's one of my pet hates, where somebody asks a question and then somebody responds and they take the question offline and they direct message them with the response. Well, that's not the game that we're playing. We're trying to share these ideas and share these responses with everybody. If you take that conversation offline, only the two of you know what the answer is. Somebody else also wants to know and wants to learn from that solution. So keep it on the platform. Yeah, I agree 100%. Let's share the questions and share the responses so that other people can, they might read about it 6 months later. And as I often do, I'll be reading through a forum and I'll pick up on a conversation that somebody had and start following it and find the answer that I wanted was an answer to somebody's question from 12 months ago. But that's just what I wanted right then.
that's right. And we have good questions coming in. But just before we go to the questions, I want to remind you the experience we just had. In fact, we had a particular question coming from somebody on one of these platforms that we are on, public platforms. And then you investigated the passing of the record ID right into the flow, which we have been using for years now. And you just discovered something new. And I want to also emphasize that, sometimes we get those questions on these platforms saying, well, Andy, give me one resource for me to learn flows inside out from A to Z. Well, there is no such resource. I mean, I actually create materials for you, but there is not one resource where you can learn everything. You have to keep learning. The learning never stops.
Very true, Andy. Yes. And both Andy and I have got flow courses that you can purchase from our respective websites. And some people will like Andy's style, some people might like mine. It's very much a personal choice. Getting back to the point, though, the thing that I discovered recently, quite by accident, was when we're passing record ID, and that's with a capital I, when we pass that across to a flow. So, for example, on an account page, we might have a button which does something. It initiates a flow. But we want to pass to that flow the ID of that current record that we've got displayed. So we've got an account record displayed. Up the top, we've got a button which says do something. When we click that button, that flow doesn't know what that account record is. Right? There's no connection between the two. It's just a button that starts off something else. So we have to pass across the record ID to that flow. Traditionally, what we've done is we've created a variable of type text, and we've ticked the input box, and we've named it very carefully record ID with a capital I. That bit's important, the capitalization of the I. And that's like a special magic variable that the flow will retrieve the ID of that account record for us. So then in our flow, we know which account we're dealing with. Okay, so we've all learned that that's the way to pass it across to a flow. What I discovered recently is it doesn't have to be typed text. So that record ID variable that we're passing across to our flow, if we create it as a type record, still has to be input, still has to have that same name, but now we pass across the entire account record into our flow. Now, what does that mean? It means you don't have to then do a get record for that account within your flow. So if you wanted within your flow to display the account name, because all you normally got was the ID, then you've got it under $record within your flow. So yeah, just a small change can make a significant difference. And there's one less element in your flow, makes your flow more efficient. So record ID can be data type record.
That's really cool. Awesome. So now we have questions coming in, and let me just display and pick a couple of them. We have Bilal, who asked a question and said, "Can I run a record triggered flow as a subflow with a screen flow?" This is like a tongue twister, right? Try to say it really quick.
Can I run a record triggered flow as a subflow within a screen flow?
Okay, I can answer that. So the
Good,
record
because I can't.
so
I'm not
so
sure.
the are they testing us, maybe, Daryl? So don't
I think
ask
they
too
might
hard,
be.
okay? It's
Yeah.
too late for me, and it's there is lunch break.
That's right. Be easy.
Okay, so well, the record triggered flow is a flow that can only be triggered when a record is created or updated or deleted, right? There are a couple of scenarios that it can run. So if you want to use that one as a subflow for a screen flow, first of all, what you can do, which I have been doing quite a bit in my training sessions as well, teaching people how to do it. I did not know that when I first started. I would just recreate the whole flow as a different type of flow. So you can actually go to your save as dialog, and where you're saving the flow as a new version, you can click on a flow as a new flow, and then go into under your advanced settings in gear. You can actually change the type of flow that is, right? You can actually save that one as a screen flow, save that one as an auto launch flow. When you do that, though, you are going to start breaking a couple of things, because you have in your record triggered flow the dollar record notation. There is no dollar record notation in your screen flow or in your auto launch flow. So you're going to have to rename those. But the number of errors you get when you're trying to save the 8-9 errors, whatever, if you eliminate all those, you got yourself actually a subflow. If you mark one of your variables as input variable, the variable or the variables that you need to pass to your subflow, and possibly if you need some output coming out of your subflow, mark a couple of variables as output variables. You can definitely run that as part of your screen flow, but it needs some work. So let's go to the next question. So what is best practice to build a flow per object? And that comes from Harshada.
This has probably got to be the most argued question in the flow world right now.
That's right.
So I think the original advice was one flow per object, okay, which is kind of the way the developers would normally approach it when they're creating triggers. Now, when we're talking about flows, screen flows don't really matter, because you can have as many of those as you like for an object, because they're always driven from a button or something else. So they're driven by a user selection. So put those off the table. We're really talking about record triggered flows. So the original idea was, one per object. And then people started going, well, we could do one on update, and we could do one on create, and we could do one on delete. And the reason why we wanted to break those up is because of the order of execution. So we had no guarantee. If you had, let's say you have 3 record triggered flows to run when an opportunity is updated. So you've got flow 1, flow 2, flow 3, but no guarantee when they run. Up until the very latest spring 22 release, which most people will have now or will have in the next couple of weeks, there was no way of controlling that. So what could happen is flow number 3 on your opportunity could run first, and then flow number 1 runs, and then flow number 2 runs. Absolutely no control over that. And that may have unintended results if you were expecting them to run in a particular sequence. However, now with Flow Trigger Explorer, that just popped out of nowhere, Andy. That was a real surprise to me. I didn't know that was coming.
And what was shocking, have you noticed that it's not even in beta?
No.
And
No,
it's something that's significant. The order of execution plus the trigger explorer. Just here you go, GA.
yeah, yeah. And the one disappointing thing is, though, even though you can go into your flows, and when you go to save the flow, you go into advanced, and down the bottom there's a section where you can put in a number, and that's its execution order number. Unfortunately, when you display them on the page in the Trigger Explorer, they don't display in number order. They're in alphabetical order. So just watch out for that. Even though you've gone and you've numbered them all and they're in the right sequence, you come back to the front page and they all seem to be still in the same order that they were. Okay. They will run in the correct order. However, there's at the moment they're not displayed in that order, and I think they'll probably fix that in the next release.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I received communication from Salesforce that that's been already fixed, so probably it will be available next release. It didn't make
Good.
it to this release, but let me answer that question first. First of all, there are a couple of things in questions like this. When and I'm not suggesting that Harshada is a beginner at all. Usually, when folks start asking these questions, they are capable in flows, but when people start learning a new concept like flows, programming, and things like that, low-code programming, they actually feel much more comfortable when they are giving very clear guidance. Okay, this is what you do. You sit down when there is dinner time, and you get up when you're done with your dinner. This is very simple for everybody, right? So the mind and the psychology actually look for those things. But when we are dealing with low-code automation, I truly believe we are dealing with some kind of development. And in development, where you have so many different capabilities, there are, in most cases, not any clear rules. I mean, you could have some basic rules about not doing any DMLs inside loops and this and that. But as long as it works, you can do various different things. And there are multiple solutions to one single use case. So that's the beauty of it. Having said that, now what you said was entirely true, Daryl. I mean, the recommendation earlier was that you should probably have only one single before save and one single after save, especially running on just purely on update. You could have another one maybe purely running on create, whatever. And once the subflow capabilities came to after save flows, people started recommending, you should kind of treat this like a big trigger handler and then build everything around this. But subflows don't always bring simplicity. Sometimes they actually bring complexity. You have to pass values to it. You have to take output from it, and then once you start dealing with collections, passing collections, it gets even more complicated. So that may not be a great solution. I think what's important here to know, with the Spring 22 release, Salesforce actually pretty much told us clearly, by the way they designed the solution, what they really want to do, what they want us to use the tool like. Because look, you can actually assign your triggers now an order of execution number from 1 to 2000. And the recommendation is that you usually need to space those like 10 apart or something, so that you can have a new trigger coming in, and maybe you need to place them in between the two that were existing. But even if you do that, you have about 200 that you can use, and that's just for before save. And then you have another 200 spacing and numbering that you can use for after save. So by just doing that, I think Salesforce is telling us, dude, play with this. This can work. So what I'm going to say is, as long as you test and it works well, you have a system for yourself where you have a naming convention and you can track your changes in development. I think you can do this. You can have multiple flows running on the same object. But this is
That's
something
certainly
that we will see a little bit better on how it performs in the next few days, in the next few months.
certainly the approach that I would be taking would be yes, multiple flows per object, using a good naming convention. I always start my flows with the object name. So if it's something to do with an opportunity, it'll be opportunity, and then it might be update status, or it might be send email, or whatever it is, so that I can look at the name of the flow and I can see exactly what it does in a nutshell. I'm not looking for, something that says update opportunity, because there could be a whole heap of flows that start with the word update. So they sort nicely on the page and I can see exactly what they were. And then I would use the Trigger Explorer to set, as Andy said, set the numbering in steps of 10, so I can set them to run in exactly the same order that I want them to run in.
Thank you for that, Daryl. Now we have another question coming from Jason. Jason says, is it possible to use get the end result of a collection sort? How should I read this? Is it possible to use get the end result of a collection sort to a collection variable without using a loop and two assignments? Collection sort, collection variable without using loop and two assignments. Can you expand on that a little bit, because I'm having a hard time trying to understand the question, Jason. If you could put a little further explanation down in chat.
Yeah, I'm
And
not exactly sure what he's trying to ask there, but with that collection utilities that are in Flow now, you can do some neat things, like you can sort them. And I'm building one for the automation hour on this weekend, where I actually get a collection of opportunity records and then I pass them through that collection sort, and I sort them in order of date. And then it also gives you the option to only retain X number of records. So I sort them and then retain only 5. So I've got the top 5 sorted by date, or whatever the criteria is. So not sure whether that's answering his question, but you certainly can do things like that. And because you're actually updating that collection, why could you not then pass it into another collection sort that does something different again?
yeah, I think this is a good time as well to talk about the new filter collection element that's coming in Spring 22. And I did not exactly understand the question 100%, but I'm sure this can help with that. Now we have a new element. We had a collection sort element that helped us to sort the collection. But now with the filter collection element, we are able to take a collection and then further down select, pick some part of that collection and assign it to another collection. And the beauty of that, that comes with also the new functionality of the choice element in ScreenFlows. Up till now, in our choice element, we were not able to use any collection variable values as potential choices, as available choices. Now we are able to do that as well with Spring 22, which means you can do one get. Let's say you are getting all the cases that are associated with an account. You can do one single get and then drill down into that collection and then take a subset of it and present it on a screen as choice elements. Feed your choice element with those values that you have just down selected in your filter collection element. So that's quite powerful. And one more thing that I have noticed, I started playing with this yesterday. I did not know this one up until yesterday. Now we get also the capability of using a formula instead of and or filter criteria combination. So we are able to do calculations, and based on those calculations, down select the collection values that we want to pick and assign to a new collection. So in the past, we used to create formula fields, and those formula fields would hold some calculation values, and then we would actually down select based on those using get. Now we don't really have to do that.
While you're looking for another question there, Andy, I'd just like to mention a tool that I spotted just the other day. It's called Nebula Logger, Nebula Logger, Logger. Now, it's a tool, it's quite an advanced tool. Oh, hello there,
Isn't
Carlos.
that amazing? Did you know this?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
I've known Carlos for
Carlos
many
came to support.
years.
Yeah.
Yes. So that Nebula Logger, it is an advanced tool, but what it allows you to do is allows you, particularly with a record triggered flow, because one of the problems there is you've got no user interface. So when you're debugging it, it's really hard to know what's going on. With this Nebula Logger, it sets up a log object for you that you can easily write details to. So if you're at the start of your get records, you can write a message to the log. If you want to do a count of how many records have been written, you can write that to the log. So yeah, more down the advanced route. If you're still starting off and learning flows, this is probably not a tool for you yet. It does take a bit of installation. There's a bit of configuration involved, some permission sets and so forth needed. But yeah, for the advanced users, that's something they might want to take a look at, Nebula Logger.
Yeah.
Do we have another question, Andy?
Yes, the question is about advanced stuff, actually. The question is, do you have a Developer One course?
No.
Okay, I don't either.
I don't consider myself a developer at all.
Yeah,
If somebody asked me, what's your job? I would say, well, anything but writing code. I don't write code.
Yes. I usually say I'm an admin who can read code, or
Yeah.
I can say I'm a low coder who can read code. I mean, I can
Yeah.
read code, but I don't really write code.
No, it's
So
not something. It's not something that excites me. But building flows is a whole lot more fun.
So now, next question from Priyanka. What is your advice for those who start learning flows? How can they be perfect?
You can't. Because if you think you're
Quit
perfect,
now. Don't stop.
quit now. That's right. Quit now. You'll never get there. It's like, how can I become an expert? You never will. There's 3 releases every year that we struggle. Like there's 450 pages of release notes coming out every year. How can you absorb all of that? I struggle just to keep up with the new stuff in flow.
It's crazy. It's a crazy person's job to keep the material updated for flow training right now.
Absolutely. It's very hard. So forget about being perfect. Just concentrate on being a little bit better each time. So tackle something new. You've seen today, we've talked about the Flow Trigger Explorer. If you've got a developer org that's already been updated to the new release, well, jump in there and create a couple of flows and find out how it works. That will make you one step closer towards perfect, but you'll never get there. That's what keeps
the
us.
learning never stops, really.
That's right.
So we have another question coming from Supriya. Is there an alternate way to avoid nested loop in flow? Now, for that, you want to look at filter collection element. Filter collection element in some cases will help you with that, and you will be able to avoid some of the loop within loop. But in general, when you are talking about joint objects and you're talking about going 3 deep and looping and things like that, if you're going that sophisticated, complicated, in general, flow is not a great tool to do that currently, because there are 2 potential problems that you are going to have. One, in your synchronous transactions, you get only 100 gets or sockways, right? So once you start doing your gets within loop, which we don't recommend, you might go over 100 gets, right? And unfortunately, in flow, you don't get the traversing capabilities that you have in Apex in some cases. So that's going to be a little bit more difficult. And the other part that's going to be difficult is a flow interview, a single flow interview can only execute 2,000 elements. And that includes all the counts that you do once you go through all your loops. So you do your 1, 2, 3 elements right before your loop, and then you have 5 elements within the first loop, and then another 5 within the second loop. You got to count how many times you go around that wheel, and you're easily going to go over the maximum iterations that you are allowed.
Thanks, Andy. We got a question from Tim about Flow Orchestrator. So, where do we see it going in the future? Is Salesforce likely to kill off approval processes and things like that, making Flow the only declarative tool? My thoughts on that before I ask Andy is there's a couple of things that I think people have missed with Flow Orchestrator, and this is quite interesting. What we can now do with Orchestrator, so Flow Orchestrator is like the granddaddy of flows. Okay, so if you've got a whole bunch of flows that are going to do something, you can string together a really complex process with Flow Orchestrator. And by complex, I mean something like you've got a new starter at your workplace. So there's a whole bunch of things that you need to do. You need to create an email address for them. You need to get them a security token to get in the door of the building. IT needs to give them a laptop, and maybe somebody else gives them a phone, and somebody organizes a desk for them. They've got to go on a phone directory somewhere. Somebody's got to give them a safety inspection and tour, and give them access to the finance system, set them up in payroll. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that need to be done. You can build each one of those as individual flows and debug them and manage them as, small pieces on their own right that stand alone and perform that function. But then you can take Orchestrator and join all those together, and you can start and sequence them. So there might be some things like have to happen in a particular sequence. So until the user has an email account on the corporate email, I can't create them a Salesforce user account. So we'll have to put those in sequence one after another. But we could, at the same time or straight after they've got their email account, we could also allocate them a desk, and we could also now allocate them a laptop, and we could put them in the directory. So there are some things that can happen in parallel, and some of them have to happen in series. Now, some of these people are not Salesforce users. Okay, so your IT department who gives out the laptops, or your people who give out the phones, or the security people give the security cards, may not be Salesforce users. It may be restricted to just your sales and service teams, but they can be included in a flow orchestration. So those orchestration flows can be distributed. I think they go out to them via email, and I'm not sure of the mechanism of how it comes back. Maybe it's just a response to an email. Not 100% sure on that, on the details, but the important part is they don't have to be Salesforce users. So now you can build an organization-wide complex flow that pulls in all of these components and ties them together. What's your thoughts on Orchestrator, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite exciting. I have not played with it yet. I'm probably going to spend some time doing some things on it this week, because I have to write a newsletter update on that one as well, and incorporate it into some future material as well. Now, I have opened it up and looked at it and tried to get started. Let me tell you, for me, the interface is not very inviting, very easy, right?
No.
So, and I mean, this is going to be difficult for a lot of people to comprehend and use. So that's the first thing that I can tell you, because obviously it needs to also deal with complicated concepts of running things in parallel, and then waiting for some let's say approvals to happen, or some, let's say, transactions to complete for the rest of it to kick in. And you said it also deals with external users that are not Salesforce users, right? So it brings a lot of complexity in. Now, the thing about approval processes, now nobody is happy with approval processes and what they do today. They are old, right? They are aged, and they need a refresh if people are gonna keep using them. Now, you can do things like that in much more complicated use cases on the Orchestrator, but the problem on that side is, as far as we understand, Orchestrator is a paid add-on product, so it is GA.
Well, that's not clear, Andy. I've asked that question many times, and I'm not getting a straight answer on that. They've
Uh,
moved it into GA with no announcement that I've ever seen about the cost of the product. So I don't know whether it's free or whether it's a paid product.
that has happened before. For example, the Salesforce functions on the development side. That has happened before. They said it's GA, and then the pricing was not available. Then the pricing was available, and people were not happy about the pricing. So this part of the whole announcement and the policy on the Salesforce side is being criticized quite heavily lately. But in any case, for the approval to move to that side, they would have to come up with a free tier or something that could accommodate the current approval processes. Until that happens, nothing is going to happen. And, like Classic is currently available. I always say that about workflow rules and process builder as well. I mean, it is going to be available and it's going to be around quite some time until it can be turned off. Now, what they can do also, what they have said they will do on the workflow rules and process builders, they can stop you creating new ones, like, on the approval process as well. But like I said, in that case, it would be the sensible thing to at least offer a free tier for the current users to migrate all that stuff to Orchestrator. If not, the functionality is going to go back, or it's going to be charged when it was free before. But I mean, the whole functionality is very exciting. I was waiting for it to become GA. Now it's GA with this release, and I'm going to spend some time on it and send updates out on that. So, and what else do we have now in the questions? Do we have any questions? Let me look at my topics. Have we covered everything? So now we talked about before our session, Daryl, it would be quite interesting to also touch on the topic of record-triggered schedule path versus schedule-triggered flows. This is a very popular question, and people get confused about this topic for a very good reason, because once you're talking about an action that you want to schedule in the future, there are multiple ways you can go about that, right?
Yeah, so we're talking about doing something in the future. Now, as you say, there are two ways that we can do that. So we can have a record-triggered flow, so a flow that starts off when something happens to the record. So let's say, for example, a new opportunity is created. So something has happened, it's triggered this thing. We can then, on a scheduled path, say, okay, let's create something in the future to occur. So we want to send an email maybe to the owner of that opportunity in 7 days, for example. So we've got a record triggered flow that's going to trigger now. And off that, we've got a scheduled path that says in 7 days, email the owner of that opportunity. Okay, so that's how we can have a trigger off a record, do something in the future. That's one way of doing future work. The other way is we may have a requirement that for every opportunity that's closing in the next 7 days, that we want to send a reminder to the opportunity owner. Okay, now they're not going to get triggered by the previous one because they weren't opportunities created, or even if that previous one was triggered on a change in the opportunity, then these ones may not be triggered because nothing's changed on them. There's a whole bunch of old opportunities there. We want to catch the owners of them before these are gone past their close date. So every Sunday night at 9 p.m., we're going to run basically a batch job that's going to be a scheduled triggered flow that's going to run at a specific time. It's going to go through all opportunities that are closing in the next 7 days, and it's going to send an email immediately to the owner of those opportunities. So there is no trigger there on those ones. Nothing's happened to those records. They've been sitting there. They're static, no changes to the record. the way we've triggered that is based on a schedule. It happens at 9 o'clock on Sunday night. Some future thing is going to occur.
Thank you for that, Daryl. Yeah, I mean, to summarize, the way I define those is your record triggered scheduled path is your delayed actions. So if you need
Yep.
to create a task 1 hour later, 5 days later, or based on the close date on the opportunity, whatever, so you do it there. And it is, like you said, triggered based on your record being updated, created. And if you want to schedule something to occur in the future sometime, you're saying adjust our clocks. Now we have to do this Thursday at 8 p.m. Then you do your schedule triggered flows. And you can also set up a recurring schedule for that one. So I would like to thank you, Daryl. We are out of time and you need to get back to work. You spend your lunch break with us today. So I wish you the best of luck, and it was such an enjoyable chat with you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Andy, and look forward to joining you and hopefully a whole heap of our listeners on the Flow Fest in February.
Yes, we have a couple of things coming really quick. We have the Flow Fest coming. We are judges there. So join us, follow our social channels. You'll find out about it. And then Terry Miller, another good friend, and I are going to start Flow Office Hours once a month. We are going to answer live your questions, about flows when you get stuck. All right. Keep following us on social channels. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Andy.
you. Thanks. Bye-bye.